Hello and welcome to At the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. Hi, I'm Bonnie Violet. I'm a trans, femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, digital chaplain, and person in recovery.
My name's Anthony. I'm an addict and alcoholic. I just got back from Mexico City and I care about you. Each week, we will provide and create a brave space where we engage in conversations about topics of recovery. Oops, did I just skip over
That's
one?
all right. Our intention, that's okay.
Yeah.
Our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery.
By tackling topics used to separate us.
But before you do that, please like, comment, share, ding that bell.
Ding, ding, ding.
All right.
So for people, what happened?
It's nice to mix it up a little bit, I guess, right? Just roll with it.
It is nice to mix it up. And for folks at home, you probably recognize that Lulu is not here, sadly.
Sad.
It's just me and Bonnie Violet. And Bonnie Violet and I were just talking about how we don't think we've ever done a show together.
Not just the two of us.
We can make it if we try.
Right.
I think that's how that goes.
Yes, that's what was going on in my head.
So how are you, Bonnie Violet?
As I was saying earlier, I'm like in a crunchy mood today. I'm not sure why, but I'm just kind of crunchy, a little rough around the edges, but I'm excited to be here with you and to have the conversation. It seems very timely for me today. And I'm going to go to a meeting after this. And I know like within a couple hours, I'll be feeling all soft and gooey, no longer crunchy.
Less crunchy.
How about you?
I'm pretty good. I just got back from Mexico City a few hours ago. That was an amazing experience. I can't even begin to describe just how great it was. But it was really, really nice. I'm happy to be home. It is very hot in San Francisco today. Hasn't been this hot in quite some time, but I am lucky to have AC, which is as you know, a rarity in San Francisco.
Yes, we've been experiencing 100+ degree weather for weeks now. It's been wild.
That is pretty wild. Do we know where Lulu is? Did Lulu say where?
No, she didn't really say. Not that she has to, but
not that she has to, but I mean it's just very mysterious.
She just said, "I'm not gonna be there." We're like, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, it's your topic. Like you're the one who came up with the topic idea.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but I guess that's just who Lulu is. So what is today's topic?
So today's topic is the promises. And the promises, for folks who maybe aren't familiar with the 12 steps, is from like the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, as well as I'm sure it's, referred to throughout the rest of the anonymouses.
All the anonymouses.
Yes. You said you looked it up.
Yeah. So I have the 9-step promises up, but I wanted to go through. So what some people don't know in recovery, or at least in 12 step, is that every step actually has a promise in it, right? So we say the 9-step promises because there's this really, really beautiful. I'm like slurring. Do you hear me slurring? It's like I've been drinking. I haven't been drinking.
You're fine.
I think it's the patty melt. Anyway, so there are 12 steps in AA and other 12-step programs, and every step actually has a promise in it. A lot of people talk about the 9-step promises because they're beautiful, and at least the way I read them, they're all the things that basically I would want in the program. So I just wanted to go quickly through just a sentence from each. What happened?
I was just going to say there's 12 of them.
Yeah, there are 12 promises. So, and they all correspond with a step. So the first promise is we are going to know our new freedom and a new happiness. So that's the first promise. Number 2 is, these are all from the 9-step promises. But I think, these are the summation of all the promises and all the steps, right? Yeah.
No, these are just from the 9th step.
Yeah, but don't they all correspond with, so like, for example, number 1, this is something we can talk about. So number 1 is, let me just read through these because these look like the enumerated 9-step promises, because this is, what are the 12 promises of AA? I got this from a website. So the first one is we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. The second one is we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. This is directly from the 9-step promises. We will comprehend the word serenity. We will know peace. Oh, actually, okay. 5, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experiences can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. 7, we will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. 8, self-seeking will slip away. 9, our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. All the birds are into it. 10, fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. 11, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And 12, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So, Bonnie Violet, you and I'm realizing that these are these are the things that are in the 9-step promises, but I'm looking at what I found here from this website, and they designate all of these different promises to different steps. How do you hear them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the 9-step promises in like that format, but I'm not sure what you're looking at as far as the other. I know there's lots of other promises in the book, but I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the things I like about what I'm looking at here is, so for example, with number 1, so it says, we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. And then the way they explain it is, people who finish the steps will experience relief from the suffering of addiction and feel free to pursue a new life without alcohol. Anyway, so do you remember when you first heard the steps? I mean, the 9-step promises?
Oh yeah. Yeah. One of the first meetings I went to, most meetings I've been in, they read the 9-step promises. Where I got sober here in Idaho, they did it at the end of the meeting. And so the 9-step promises was like, I always looked forward to hearing them at the end of the meeting. It was really helpful for me, especially really early on. And like, I think more than anything, even like over not drinking or using, I think these promises were I think that's what I really wanted, was like, I wanted the promises, like those were the results I wanted, because those were I guess they were the other side of how I was currently experiencing life.
Yeah, I hear that. The way I don't remember the first time I ever heard them, but the way I read them, it's almost like, so I like to think that the big book is kind of divinely inspired, because when I read the 9-step promises, they make me think like of all the things I didn't have while I was drinking and using, right? Like I didn't know how to intuitively know how to handle situations, I feared people. I had economic insecurity. And so in that way, it just feels like a perfect kind of like negative image of what my life looked like when I was out there.
Agreed. I think it did, because I didn't necessarily know like exactly what was wrong and what I was failing at and what I wanted. But I felt like, that the promises kind of did put out a list of like the possibilities, right? That those actually could be possible results in my life, because I just felt like for so long I just resigned to the fact, and it started really young for me. I growing up in poverty in a trailer in a small town in Idaho, I think there was just this constant said and unsaid like thing about me that I would never amount to much, right? And so, and I'd always kind of been even a bit of an overachiever, and I always tended to kind of still do really well, but there was still some sort of like ceiling, or only so far I could get. And I think the thing that I took most from my childhood was that life was just hard. Life was going to suck, and you just had to try to be like kind through it. And there was no like belief that maybe I could experience a life without struggle, without pain, and that's not to say that I that's still my story, but it's not my whole story. Whereas I think much of my life prior to sobriety was all about my struggle and my difficulties versus, all the other, great parts of my life, great and not great parts of my life too.
Yeah, I hear that. That's really relatable. It makes me think like, at least when I'm reading the steps, or let me back up a little bit. When I think about some of the shares that I've heard, where sometimes, you'll hear someone say in a meeting, well, no one came to AA because they were doing well,
Mm.
right? And so sometimes it makes me wonder, like, can a person actually get sober? Can a person actually have these promises already fulfilled in their life and still,
Mm.
come to
I,
recovery, right? Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, probably not all of these, but I'm sure there's some of them, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah, I
because
don't know.
yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of because I'm thinking like the fear of people and economic insecurity, like things like that. But it's like I think the thing that relates to me though is that in with when it comes to spirituality, um, there are plenty of religious and spiritual people who can't stop drinking and using if
Right,
that's something that they want to do. So I think there is something more than just what I mean. Like so, I think you can, and I think in early AA, my understanding is that you had to be. It was kind of built for like the drunk of drunks, right? Like the bottom rung, if you will, if you even I don't even like putting it that way, but like the folks that were definitely out of control and life was unmanageable and that sort of thing. Whereas through the years, I think there has been space created for people like we don't have to go there. We don't have to get there
right.
to stop, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I don't think we have to hit the bottom, the absolute bottom, in order to get there.
And many
I
of us experience a bottom once we come in. I know my bottom happened 3 to 6 months into recovery.
Yeah, it's almost in like a way I don't think well, when I think back at like what life was like before recovery, but even more so than that, when I think about before I actually started working a program, and I placed emphasis on working a program because I can remember like being sober, kind of going through the motions, being hella dry, but still being so miserable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's crazy about that to me is like even then there was a bit of relief. Like I did still have technically some of the promises, but I didn't have them in a way that I think um, is possible, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of that for me had to do with. I mean, it goes so far back, right? I can just remember being so numb all the time, And I think part of my feeling numb before I got sober was just kind of like, there was just all this trauma growing up. We talk about trauma a lot, which as an aside, like I sometimes think like, is it possible to um, be an addict and an alcoholic and not have any trauma? Like, I don't think I've ever met anyone who's come into recovery who was like, yeah, I have. There was, like everything was actually,
Right.
there maybe are a couple people, but anyway, that being said, I can just remember being so numb and not really having, maybe not being awake enough to appreciate what was available to me. So I've shared about before how when I actually worked the fourth step, like when I actually worked the steps, I had this relief, and um, I can remember just there was a little bit of mourning there because I was like, whoa, this like relief, this new happiness was always available to me. I just wasn't willing to work for it, or I wasn't willing to maybe not even work for it. I think I just feel like I wasn't ready, right? And taking it back to the promises, I like that they're called promises, right? They're not called you might get this. They're
Mm-hmm.
like actual promises. Um, and something about the promises being in print makes them that much more real for me, right? Because I could be like a dry ass alcoholic and I can yell at the big book and I could say, well, you made these promises and they never came to me. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
never fulfilled. But I know in my experience that they have come for me and they continue to come when I do the work. And just as easily can they be taken away.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing that I think in my early recovery, I think, I think so. One of the things that I guess surprised about me, like just because I could get the promises doesn't mean I keep them. And I remember kind of recognizing that and being like, oh, you bamboozled, you fooled me, you know. But that was just my limited understanding of things. I think there's a lot of things in the big book in particular that sometimes you just have to tilt your head, or it's not necessarily not, you know. I think that's the divine. I think any kind of divine text kind of has that ability. And there's just moments where you're like, oh no, this is true to this, but also now that my promises are going away, it's still true, because it says if I do these things, I will have these results. And if I'm not, if I'm in those spaces, then it means I need to do those steps again in order to have that sort of result.
Yeah, it reminds me of what my sponsor says. She says, if you feel that God is far away, you need to ask yourself who moved.
Mm.
So, like, similarly, it's like if I'm not like experiencing these things that I get from the program, like, what's my part in it? I think what's important to say here too, at least for me, is there have been times where I'm working what I think is like a perfect program, and life still can be pretty shitty, right? And
Yeah.
I think, like, just because life is shitty, I mean, it's taken a long time to get here. Just because life gets shitty does not mean that my recovery has I've somehow failed, and I'm somehow being
Right.
punished, like, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm somehow not working hard enough. I think that's one of the wonderful things that a person gets in recovery, or at least that's been my experience, is that, when you are working a program, when you do have a relationship with a power greater than yourself, you do know how to handle situations that used to baffle you. And sometimes those situations that used to baffle you are like feeling shitty, or I don't know, you get bad news.
Mm.
Just any number of things, but you learn how to, maybe not learn, but you like intuitively know, like, oh, this is the best course of action that I should take here.
Right, right. Well, and I think some of that, I don't think, I think sometimes the promises can be happen, but that doesn't mean, like, I think there's like the, the fear of economic insecurity. It's not that, oh, I'm gonna have money and I'm gonna feel like I'm gonna have enough money for everything. What it says is that the fear of the economic insecurity. It does not say I won't have economic insecurity. It just says that I won't fear it. And that's something that I've come to experience, and I think it's a gift that progressively has, um, I guess, come true for me.
Yeah.
Um, Jaylon has a question. What's a perfect program look like?
Right.
That's the $1 million question.
Yeah. I mean, there is no perfect program, you know? Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, I think perfect is just like are you staying sober? Are you staying sane? Are you, like, I think that is, I mean, you're doing, I guess, perfect, that which can get you the results. But yeah, but there is not no like regimented, like you have to do this, this, and this to get that. I mean, wouldn't that be great? Like
yeah.
if life was just that way, that if you do one, like 1 + 1 always equals 2, it's like actually you do this and you do that and you hope for this, but whether or not that's going to happen is like a whole nother thing.
Yeah. I feel like if a sponsee was asking me that question, I might say that, like, at least in my own interpretation, that the only thing perfect is God. And
Mm.
um and no, like, I can follow the steps to the letter, and I could take all the suggestions, and that does not somehow equate to perfection necessarily.
Mm.
I don't know. I almost feel like, I heard, who's that famous Sandy Beach? There's this really awesome talk that he gives, where he talks about the phrase, like, we strive for progress, not perfection.
Mhm.
And there's this kind of like hammering down on what that means. And I remember one of the things I took away from it is that we shouldn't read that line as like, oh, well, I shouldn't strive, or I shouldn't try to achieve perfection. That I should settle for progress.
Mhm.
Um, but what I think he ultimately says, and if somebody out there knows better than I do, please chime in. But I think ultimately what he says is that it's in the striving for perfection that it's like this constant thing that we're doing. It's not like we strive for this thing and then we kind of like rest back. You know, it's
Right.
this kind of constant moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for me, I think for that makes me think of too, like, I'm a spiritual person. I identify that way. But if you ask me what my God was and all that sort of shit, like, I don't fucking know most of the time. Sometimes I'll have an answer, but I think the one thing I've done consistently, and which might make it perfect, just to play with that language, is that I've always been a seeker, and I've always continued to seek more understanding or more connection, or any of those sorts of things. So I think I think that might be like, it's like, as long as you're continuing to work through the program, I think a perfect program might even be that you didn't not ever drink, like all that stuff is like you said, like, that's God shit. Like, that's stuff that's like beyond my pay grade. Like, I don't understand. I don't know. I just don't understand that. You know what I mean? And all I get to do is just continue to try to do my best for myself and for the people about me. And, you know, I don't know, but yeah, I think
I love that. Yeah.
it's really easy to get into that idea though. I mean, in early recovery, I think things are still a little black and white. So I think there are some things where it can be kind of like, you do this and this, and you know what I mean? And you'll start to have these sorts of things. But, I think as time passes, some of the greatest things, the greatest results are results we weren't even reaching for.
Yeah, I feel that. And just as an aside, Jalen, thank you for writing in your question. Anyone else listening, if you have any thoughts or comments about the 9-step promises or anything that comes up for you, please send them in and we'll read them and we'll talk about them.
David sends a red heart.
David sends a red heart?
To Jaylon, at least.
Oh.
I'm sure we can get a little bit of that love too.
The promises. There was something else that came to mind and I just totally forgot.
I have a question for you. So, it's, speaking of perfect program, with the 9th step, they call it the 9-step promises, with the idea that it happens once you do the 9th step. Did you experience any of these promises before you did the 9th step? And if so, which one or ones?
Did I experience them before I was halfway through?
Right.
Yes. And you just reminded me of what I wanted to say. So yes, and I'll come back to it. If I had to characterize like what's different, so relapse is certainly a part of my story. I've shared about that before, right? I've relapsed several times, right? If I could characterize what's different about my life right now from the last time I relapsed, it's that the last time I relapsed, something finally clicked. And the thing that clicked was that, we say in the text, I conceded to my innermost self, right? And part of that has been realizing that I have this human brain and that my human brain can't possibly understand the entire world. And that like my thoughts are my thoughts and my perspective is my perspective. And so, and the way that we say like we resigned from the debating society, I think very similarly, like I have to resign from the debating society when it comes to all the arguments and thoughts that I have about the program. And I'm bringing this up because I'm thinking about perfection. I think like perfection is this, I think of perfectionism and like when people say I'm a perfectionist, I think often they think they're describing something that's actually not there. So like sometimes I hear people say, well, like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And perfectionist, because I used to think that I was, is this idea that like I have to get it perfect. Because in order for me to get it perfect, right, like if I get it perfect, then that means I'm doing something right. And so it actually stalls creativity and growth. So it's actually doing the exact opposite. So to your question, I think, yes, like I do think that I started to experience some of this, like for example, but I would get them in burst, like you were talking about, like I don't necessarily hold on to them. Like the words, I will understand the word serenity. Like I can remember having these moments where I was like, whoa, like this is serenity. Like this is a peace that like I didn't know I could have. And it would happen in like the weirdest situations, you know, like I've talked about this before where I don't think there's like a one-to-one relationship with the steps. Um, but you know, sometimes I'll have a conversation with one, and it'll be something that they say or something they do, and like a peace comes over me, and I feel like insanely connected, and I can't describe that. And I can remember in really early recovery, because in the very beginning I was so hungry and I was in so much pain, that I was willing to do whatever people were telling me. And so I felt like in that way I like expedited some of these experiences, although I didn't get to hold on to them for very long.
Yeah, I think that was a surprise for me too when I started experiencing those before the ninth step, and it was probably helpful. You know, I think sometimes it was kind of a little carrot, if you will, because you know, early recovery is so awful. At least it was for me. Like, it was so hard, and I always label it God awful because it was awful and I found God. But like, it's so awful that, you know, you do need those little moments of some sort of glimmer of hope or whatever. Because for me, it's like I can only live off of your good results long. Like, I can only have hope that I will experience what you are experiencing for so long before before it starts happening for me to, you know, like, I'm not going to continue to do it. Like, I continue to be in recovery even when it's hard, because I come to believe that this is the easier, softer way. Trying to live a spiritual life in recovery is the easier, softer way, and it's been fucking hard. But I do know that if I wasn't in this space, that I probably wouldn't be alive. And if I was, I would probably either not want to be alive, or I'd be in so much more pain than I've ever been, you know, prior to, you know, getting into recovery.
Right. That's really beautiful. You know what I really like about the 9-step promises, at least I'm noticing it right now, and I don't know if I'm noticing this or I'm just remembering something that someone said to me, but none of them have anything to do with drinking. Right? They all have to do with quality of life. Right? And
Mm-hmm.
it just reminds me of, we say, for example, that we have an obsession of the mind and an allergy of the body, right? And all of these promises, I think, they speak to some kind of quality of mind or like quality of body. I think, are there any of the promises that you've ever struggled with? Like, where you feel like, oh, this hasn't happened for me, or I still have this thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't. I mean, I feel like I've, you know, I mean, I think they've slipped, you know, like I haven't constantly felt them, but and in some ways, you know, you know, it's like I did find a new freedom and a new happiness, say, but I have to continue, like I continually come to understand where I'm not free. You know, and so I think it's something that's like, I guess it's something that can escape me because there's more freedom to come, you know? And that's something I've continually come to understand more and more. It's like, because you can experience freedom and happiness, but but it doesn't mean the ultimate freedom is yours necessarily, in
Right.
whatever way that you might call that.
Right.
I remember the first time I wrote, go ahead. Was there a
Well, I
comment?
was just going to say, what you're reminding me of is the line from page 85. I just had to look it up. It's, what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition, right? Which is basically what I feel like you're describing. It's like, I can't rely on yesterday's recovery to keep me sober today.
Yes.
Yeah.
And today, and the way that I hold my recovery and lean into recovery may look different today than it did yesterday.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that that I have to often remind myself, because granted, I don't know that it's the perfect way, but I don't work the program the way I did when I first started, you know, like, and so I think there is an element of being able to live from that, right? To live beyond that, not to be stuck into a space of just constantly like in the grind of that hard work. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think if it was always like that, I mean, what's the point if I'm going to be miserable, you know?
Right. Right. Um, that makes me think of a bunch of stuff. Yeah, you're making me think about a bunch of stuff, and I can't pin any of it down.
Yeah. One of the first promises that I experienced and I was surprised by was that that I'll be able to handle situations that used to baffle me. And I remember I had a close friend, very, very dear friend of mine, who struggled a lot with like self-harm and suicide attempts and ideation and those sorts of things. And we were always there to support. And I think there was a part of me that always felt like I was saving her. Like I was doing something for her. And maybe I was, I don't know. But in early recovery, it got to where I just didn't have the capacity for it, you know? And at one point I remember she wanted to go like end her life. And I told her that I really didn't want her to do that. And like, you know what I mean? Like I talked with her, but I was also like, you know, and then she asked me if I would take her to the hospital. And I had done it every other time. And for whatever reason, that moment I said, no, I won't take you to the hospital. I was like, it's like, it's not that I'm too busy and that I don't care. It's just, I just don't know that it'll be helpful, you know? And I've done this plenty of times where I've taken you to the hospital and you've done these things and then you leave early and there's all this. And I think maybe something different needs to happen this time, you know? And that was something that was not like, I didn't plan in that conversation, or like, that was just something that like came out of my mouth. And I was like, girl, did you just say that? like you're such a dick. But I do really feel like that was a moment of like, I don't know, like that was, it's so hard because I have a hard time with right and wrong and like but I just have to trust in that moment for whatever reason I said, because she didn't end up committing suicide, but you know, that may or may not have anything to do with what I did in that moment, because I have no power over that. And I think for me, I needed to have that experience so that I could understand that, because I'd always been somebody who's tried to help people and I want to, you know, like be of service and those sorts of things. And I think at the end of the day, it's like, girl, you ain't got that kind of power.
Right. I appreciate what you said about like that you struggle with right and wrong. I have that especially in like nuanced situations. That's really hard for me. Where I may have like a gut reaction, or I may have a thought, and sometimes like the thought and the feeling like don't agree with each other, and so I'm left with like not knowing what to do. And so I really appreciated that. And I think I've certainly had those experiences too, where I am, you know, I am kind of acting against what comes to me naturally, you know, like I feel like I'm a natural caregiver. I always have been. And so sometimes whenever if I keep that to myself or I withhold, what I'm now recognizing is, you know, it's a gift you give to people. It's not something that that when I withhold that, I do feel a bit like guilty sometimes.
Yeah.
I was remembering too about one of the things that my a former sponsor once said to me is that, you know, the second I start kind of going through the motions and recovery, you know, my alcoholism or my addiction, like it adjusts to my sobriety, right? So if my sobriety doesn't change, then my addiction then starts to surpass my sobriety. It's kind of like improperly taking antibiotics. You know, it's like if you have to take the full course of antibiotics. Otherwise, if you stop, like the bacteria might start to mutate. And I think, at least again in my experience, what happens is that alcoholism or addiction does start to mutate. You know, for example, I love being of service. I love doing service work. But there have been times where I do service alcoholically, and then suddenly I notice myself hating the people I'm doing service with, hating service in general, and then I'm thinking to myself like, well, what happened? You know, and I like to think when I look at that situation, it's like, oh, I didn't keep my recovery fresh. I have to keep my recovery fresh.
Right.
Were you
Well,
gonna say something? Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it just kind of goes sideways, right? It's like the addiction for me finds, or the unrecovered existing finds ways to come out in other forms, you know? And that's why I think I like the idea of not labeling anything good or bad, because I think that to some degree that makes it easy. You can just like put it away or whatever. But I think what's important is to come to really understand what happened. What is the truth of what happened and all of the elements around that? Because who's to say that the 10 times before that, the best, right, correct, the thing that God would have me do was what I did. And then that 11th time it was different, but it was still within the same sort of, thinking. Like, every situation is different. Oftentimes I think we can get caught in the belief that, oh, this, I've been here again. This boyfriend has a different name, but it's the same relationship or whatever. And it's like yes and no. Like like you change, they change, like I don't know. It's like, I think for me, it's like, I know I've changed. So at a minimum, I'm a different person in that relationship. And so, that's going to have some sort of difference, if you will, than,
I remember you extending me that grace. I feel like a month or so ago when I was talking about my ex, and I had basically used that same language where I said, I was just repeating the same mistakes and I should have known better, basically all that kind of language. And I think what you said was exactly that, which is, well, are you really still the same? And are you really committing like the same errors? And I'm with you 100% on that. Like, no, right? Like, just logically, it's impossible to be the same person. Right. I certainly, and that's one of the things I like about therapy is that my therapist is a very good historian, right? And so my therapist can point back to situations that I've experienced and say, but look, you actually have changed from that point, like from that point on.
And that doesn't absolve you from like noticing what might have caused harm or what, you know what I mean? Like I think it's important to kind of learn from it and to come to understand it, but you know what I mean? So I don't want to feel like you just can, because I guess when you live in a right and wrong world, it doesn't really matter, but it still it doesn't keep you from, I think, especially if you're working a spiritual program and you start to gain these principles and this way of living, like you don't have to label things right or wrong to make better choices or make choices that get the results that you are wanting to have.
Right.
More likely.
Right. It, like in the 10 step and the 12 and 12, basically the encouragement is like, for the folks not familiar with the 10 step, basically at the end of the day, when you're doing a 10 step, you're basically taking a very mini inventory of your day. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? And one of the lines is that, we're cautious not to sit with morbid reflection. Anyway, all of that is to say is that the takeaway of really the 10 step is to treat the experiences, whether you try to call them good or bad, is to treat all of that as data so that it can inform the decisions you make in the future. Right. We don't sit around and we like beat ourselves up over the shit that we didn't do well, but we take that information, and we do what we need to do with it. It's so hard not to, at least it seems counter to the way maybe the human mind works, to say like, oh, there are no right and wrongs, right? Like they're just experience. But I notice that I am the happiest and I grow the most when I'm not like adding labels to every single experience that I'm having or to every person that I see, I think maybe the last thing I'll say about that is, and maybe like coming back to the 9 step promises, is that the other thing is that for me, the 9 step promises, they're not happening in this sequence. Basically what happens for me is like, I live my life the best way that I know how, using the 12 steps, because that's what's worked for me. And by virtue of living this life, like these magical things start to happen around me. So I can't necessarily focus on the promises themselves, like the cash and prizes, but I just have to live my life.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's not only just it's not like just, I think it's not only just doing like the 12 steps, say, over and over again, which are important, but it's all the things that come from that as well, and being responsible for that. So because I think sometimes it can seem like, oh, the only way, and we're not saying this because we're not the arbiters or the representatives of AA, but I think it can feel like that's the only way. And I don't know. I don't know that I could just do the 12 steps every day and just kind of go to meetings and do all that and be okay. I feel like I've gained a lot of experience, and I've been able to go out into different places and different scenarios and carry the message, if you will, and like bring my recovery out in the world. And I think continuing to do that, I think, is what often keeps me going as well. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but Jaylon has a comment. Jaylon says, my sponsee is having issues with recovery and their willingness, and often asks, what's the point? And I don't have an answer. I didn't question the program when I started, and I feel like in order for me to experience the promises, the answer lies in trusting the process. Yes.
Yeah, we only have 4 minutes left, Jaylon. But we should come back to this. I think quickly for me is the program didn't start to work for me until I stopped asking questions like that. Why, as I've heard several times, it's not a spiritual question. So I had to get over myself and stop asking questions like that.
Right. Well, and there is, like, just to be silly, there is a part where, like, in something we read often in the literature, it says, the point is, spell it out, girl, the A, B, and C's. There are the A, B's, and C's. I can't think of what they are right now. But I'm wondering if next week we should talk about what is the point? Like, what's the point? Maybe that could be the title of next week's show.
Yeah.
Just so we can continue this conversation, maybe.
Yeah. What is it? The point is to help the alcoholic that still suffers.
I can't even think of what it is right now. It's like,
that life had become unmanageable, that the power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, and that God could and would if God were sought. Right. Those are the ABCs. So we have 3 minutes left. Should we tell people the things?
Sure. Yeah. You can get a hold of me, Bonnie Violet, at A Queer Chaplain on all of the things. You can check out my website at aqueerchaplain.org. And I'm really excited about the Dragon Spirituality Summit taking place October 7th through 9th in Chicago. It happens in real life, but it's also virtual. Check into that.
Awesome. And you can find me on Instagram at alucasccc. And a quick update about that. My sponsee, I don't know if I shared this, one of my sponsees said that they will help me with my Instagram. So hopefully there's going to be more maybe to look at or listen to on there. And if you don't have any of the socials and you want to send us an email, go ahead and send us an email at podcast@castrocountryclub.org. Or if you'd like to send us a message on our speak pipe. Bunny Violet, you opened your lips. Were you going to say this one?
Nope, go for it.
Okay. If you want to leave us a message, like old school answering machines, you can leave a message, a voicemail on our speak pipe, which you can find at www.speakpipe.com/@the-CCC.
And the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBT recovery community. They provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth. Their vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support. You can find more information at castrocountryclub.org. It's like a prompter.
Yeah, tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m. where we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels, which you can find at YouTube.com/bit.ly/ at the CCC. No one's ever going to remember that.
And find us wherever you listen to podcasts at the CCC.
And I think that's
I
it.
think that was it, right?
Yeah. We love you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Ta-ta.